Thank you. And our next item of business is consideration of business motion S5M 19729 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a revision to today's business. Could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And no member wishes to speak against the motion. The question, therefore, is that motion 19729 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. Thank you. That's just bringing decision time forward to 4:35, 25 to 5. Thank you. Moving on now to topical questions. Our first question is from Tom Arthur.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the Scottish Affairs Committee report recommendation to introduce legislation to lawfully pilot a supervised drug consumption facility in Scotland.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
Scottish Affairs Committee inquiry into problem drug use in Scotland supports our view that what we face in terms of drug deaths is an emergency and that the Misuse of Drugs Act should be amended to allow a range of public health focused responses. The need for this type of service and the evidence supporting it has been further reinforced during this inquiry. These facilities can save lives, and I urge the UK Government to take the necessary steps to either support a pilot facility or devolve the powers to Scotland so that this Parliament can take these actions to save lives.
Tom Arthur.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? He and other members of the Chamber will note that the report criticises the Tory UK Government for, and I quote, routinely ignoring evidence on what would be the most effective approach to reducing problem drug use, as well as blocking proposals to introduce drug consumption rooms in Scotland, despite witnesses saying that, and I quote, the case for such a facility in Glasgow is amongst the most compelling in Europe. Does the Minister agree with me that this is a shameful approach?
Minister.
Yes, I do. I strongly agree, and I just do not understand how the UK Government, which has recognised the benefits of these facilities, can stand in the way of saving lives. There's a strong body of evidence from a number of countries that these facilities prevent fatal overdoses and encourage engagement with services. Furthermore, a range of health professionals and experts from across the UK gave evidence to state that this is the most important thing that Glasgow could do. The UK Government's own advisory group, the ACMD, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, supports their introduction, and in recent weeks, 2 separate UK Parliament committees have strongly recommended that these facilities should be introduced.
Tom Arthur.
Presiding Officer, there are over 20,000 people in Scotland with hepatitis C, 10,000 of whom we believe are not being diagnosed. We know that HIV still remains a public health challenge. We know that drug consumption facilities can help us tackle these public health challenges and ultimately, as the Minister said, save lives. So does the Minister agree with me that whatever government we end up with at Westminster in December, they must treat this issue with the urgency that it warrants, or better still, devolve the necessary powers to this Parliament?
Minister.
Absolutely. I absolutely call on the incoming UK Government to amend the Misuse of Drugs Act or to devolve the powers which will allow this Parliament to take a range of public health focused initiatives which will save lives. Clearly, these proposals could save lives across the United Kingdom. I think the UK Government should be taking a public health approach to drugs everywhere in the UK, but if they won't do it, then please devolve these powers so this Parliament can make these decisions.
Liam Kerr, to be followed by Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Minister tell us what research has been done to assess the impact of the SNP's decision to cut £15 million from alcohol and drug partnerships 4 years ago on the delivery of those services?
Minister.
The member will be well aware that in 2018 the government increased the budget by £20 million, and just this year in the programme for government, the First Minister has agreed that we will increase the budget for the next 2 years by an additional £20 million.
Monica Lennon, to be followed by Liam MacArthur.
The Scottish Affairs Committee report noted benefits of de facto decriminalisation programmes elsewhere in the UK. The Lord Advocate has acknowledged that he has the power to extend the scope of Police Scotland's current de facto decriminalisation policy to drugs other than cannabis. Given the committee's endorsement of such programmes, is the Minister supportive of such an extension, and will he commit to working with the Lord Advocate to make it a reality?
Thank the member for her question. Obviously, this is one of the areas of work that the Drugs Death Task Force is looking at, and the Crown are part of that task force to make sure we can look at what more we can do within the powers that we have in this Parliament. But I do think it's important that we look further afield as well. What more could we do? And we should use every single lever possible, either that are within the power of this Parliament or in the power of Westminster in order to save lives.
Liam MacArthur, to be followed by Bob Doris.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Following on from Monica Lennon's question, it wasn't just the Lord Advocate that made the case for this. I think ACC Steve Johnson said that Police Scotland could consider a diversion scheme that was wider than the recorded police warning system, as is currently the case in Thames Valley and Durham. So can the Minister commit to this Parliament that the Government will take specific action to pursue this option?
Minister.
I think it is always important that we remember the different responsibilities of Parliament, Government and the Crown in these matters. But as I said to Monica Lennon, it is important that the Crown are part of the Drug Death Task Force in terms of looking at how we can make a difference here. I think there is also a wider issue about whether we can look at other models around decriminalisation from other parts of the world. And I think it's appropriate that this Parliament is able to have those sorts of discussions, looking at what's happened in places like Portugal in terms of saving lives, where we've seen an absolutely massive turnaround. But I can give the member the assurance that the Crown are part of the Drugs Death Task Force because they want to be part of looking at what the solutions can be.
Bob Doris.
Presiding Officer, when I last met the Minister to discuss the drugs death crisis with Reverend Brian Casey in Springburn, both myself and Reverend Casey were deeply concerned at the relative ease and affordability of being able to purchase a pill press to mass-produce the potentially lethal so-called street Valium. We hope there could be action in this area. Presiding Officer, can I ask the Minister, can you update me any action the Scottish Government can take regarding this area?
Minister.
We know that criminal gangs in Scotland are using these machines to produce vast quantities of street benzodiazepines, which are having devastating effects on communities across Scotland. And I'm fully committed to taking any possible action that may help save lives of those most at risk as a result of their drug use. I've instructed my officials to explore what options are available under current devolved powers to tackle the sale and regulations of these machines, and I hope I would receive support from across the chamber.
Thank you very much. We move on to question 2, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what urgent action it plans in response to recent reports of a rise in stress-related sickness absence amongst prison officers.
Cabinet Secretary Hamza Youssef.
The Scottish Government recognises the importance of providing a safe environment for those living and working in our prisons. Prison officers work in a difficult and intensive environment which can at times be dangerous. The Scottish Prison Service provides a range of measures and interventions to those who require them. This includes occupational health, support and access to counselling services. Absence at SPS was increasing month on month for over 2 years. There's now positive signs that this trend may be reversing with slight reductions at the end of August and September. Scotland's prisons are stable, they're safe and well run. That is very much to the credit of prison officers and staff across the country. I'm very grateful for their unwavering dedication and commitment. I was pleased that the agreement was reached on the Scottish Prison Services pay agreement for 2019 to 2022. This reflects the important contribution made by staff in our prisons, and it rightly sees the lowest paid staff in our prisons receive a pay increase of up to 6% in the first year and 15% over 3 years. As part of that pay deal, agreement was reached on wider reforms, including the introduction of a new attendance management policy, which should directly help to tackle the very issue the member raises.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the answer. Overcrowding in prisons, combined with an increase in violence, mental health issues and the use of psychoactive substances, has all raised the key factors within the sickness level. And some staff feel adequately skilled or trained to deal with some of the issues that they are confronted with. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, it's quite obvious that there is an urgent requirement for some priority here. Will he agree to that?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do agree with this urgency, and can I thank Alexander Stewart for asking the question. I know when his time as a councillor he took a real interest in issues around our prisons. And he's right, of course, there are a range of factors. If there was one factor that could be dealt with, if there was one silver bullet, one panacea, we would have found that. There clearly isn't. There's a range of factors. I do think some of the work that SPS is currently doing to try to tackle this is really important. So, for example, this includes telephone and face-to-face counselling. I think it's really important that that is provided to staff. I know there's also been a pilot of a variety of occupational health interventions as well, and they're being evaluated to see if they could be rolled out right across the prison estate. Furthermore, as well as the mental health issues, which the member is right to focus on, it's worth also mentioning the physical health demands of such a job. We know that approximately 15,000 days per annum are lost to musculoskeletal conditions. Therefore, SPS is introduced in HMP Edinburgh and HMPY and YOI Pullman free physiotherapy services to staff. And that has been very, very positive. And again, there'll be consideration of rolling that out further as well. So I agree with Alexander Stewart. There's an urgency to it. That's where work is already taking place. We've seen in the last couple of months a more positive trend, but clearly still a lot more for us collectively to do.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary. The fact is, Cabinet Secretary, that in the last year alone, stress-related sickness has gone up by nearly 1/3. And the fact is that prison officers are quitting altogether because for some of them, the thought of going back is too much to bear. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to guarantee that staff will get the vital resources, support and training they need to ensure that they can fulfil that job?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we have invested with the prison service tell us they need more financial resource. This year alone, we've invested an additional 24 million into the prison service. That was coming from the prison service, that they needed that additional funding because of the pressures that they face with the overcrowding problem. So I can give an absolute assurance to Alexander Stewart and indeed any other member across this chamber that when the prison service come to me and they tell me that they have an urgent issue that needs dealt with, then this government is going to listen to them. And that is demonstrated by that historic pay deal of 15% over 3 years for prison officers who do an excellent job. And all of us, including the government here, I'm sure recognise that increasingly difficult job.
And Shona Robertson.
Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that prison officers do an incredible job and should be recognised for the important work they do in often difficult circumstances, as I saw for myself when I visited Barlinnie this morning with the Justice Committee? While the Scottish Government is committed to reducing the prison population by introducing a presumption against short sentences, can the Cabinet Secretary tell the Chamber what impact the Conservative policies on justice would have on our prison capacity?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I mean, it is a fair point, and Alexander Stewart in his remarks acknowledged that overcrowding was part of one of the factors involved in staff sicknesses and absence, and we are absolutely committed, and I as Justice Secretary am absolutely committed to reducing our prison numbers. If I took Conservatives' recent justice policies of ending automatic early release for short sentences, whole life sentences, and indeed their opposition to presumption against short sentences, we would increase the prison population by about 40%. The prison population would rise to about 11,500. And as far as I'm aware, though Conservatives can tell me otherwise, they have never announced any policy to build an additional prison. So therefore, that 40% increase would have to be managed within our current prison. You'd have to build 3 new Barlinnies at least to cope with that kind of demand. So if they think the overcrowding position is affecting staff now, with the Conservative policies, they would not only be exacerbated, they would be at the point, I think, frankly, of breaking point.
Thank you. Question number 3, Angela Constance.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the report by the all-party political group on deaths abroad, consular services and assistances, why families in the UK deserve better and what can be done.
Minister Ben McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government, of course, recognises the difficulties faced by Scottish families who suffer the death of a loved one abroad. And ministers have met a number of times with families to discuss their experiences. We are grateful to the all-party parliamentary group for their very serious piece of work on this very serious and emotive issue. And while it is the role of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to provide consular support, the Scottish Government is committed to exploring this issue further and identifying where support can be improved. We will therefore carefully consider the report's findings and how we can work alongside the UK Government departments and other key agencies and stakeholders to improve how victims and their families are supported following the death of a relative overseas. And I'm sure I speak with the whole chamber that our thoughts remain with the many families who have lost a loved one in these circumstances.
Angela Constance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks to the Minister. This report is based on the lived experience of 60 families who've had the trauma of a loved one dying abroad. And as it's crucial that we all now move from expressing our condolences to taking action, will the Minister commit to fully informing Parliament of his considerations given to all the germane recommendations, including the Pearson-Maxwell Protocol recommended to help with the costs of translation, emergency travel and repatriation when not covered by travel insurance? Minister.
This is a very comprehensive and detailed report, as I said previously, which sets out the experience of many families, as Angela Constance has said. And I'm sure she will appreciate that as a government as a whole, we want to take time to properly consider the report's various recommendations. That said, I want to be clear that we are open-minded at looking at the various ways to help support families who have lost a loved one abroad. Complications with repatriation and the costs involved are clearly a common issue for many families. And this is something that the Victim Surcharge Fund may be able to assist with. Although, given the fund's legal focus on supporting families of crime, it may be difficult to use it to support cases where there has been an accidental death. However, that being said, we will look at the recommendations in the report, this recommendation in the report that Angela Constance referred to in detail as part of a wider evaluation and consideration of the report's full recommendations and respond as appropriate.
Angela Constance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Both the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and the First Minister were kind enough to meet with my constituents, the family of Kirsty Maxwell, and they know, therefore, how abandoned this family feel. Therefore, will the Minister agree to extend the family's bereaved service to include those who have lost a loved one abroad due to murder, manslaughter or indeed suspicious circumstances, and that this would help create a more comprehensive and trauma-informed service for families like Kirsty's?
Minister.
The Victim Support Scotland's service for families bereaved by crime is providing dedicated and continuous support for families bereaved by murder or culpable homicide. And at present, cases involving a death abroad are out with the scope of this service, as the report notes. The service is in its first year of operation and has already expanded its scope to ensure availability of support for families where the death may have occurred some time ago, but there is ongoing interaction with the justice system, for example, in relation to temporary release or parole. We are open-minded about the possibility of recommendation 5E, but we are also very keen to ensure that the impact of any further changes to the scope of this fund would be well understood and adequately resourced. And so we will consider recommendation 5E as part of our very serious analysis of the recommendations as a whole. The Cabinet Secretary for Justice and the Cabinet Secretary for External Affairs will meet soon to discuss the recommendations in this report, and also look to engage with the new UK government when established on these issues too. And officials are already engaged with Foreign and Commonwealth Office officials on the recommendations in this report, and the Justice Secretary has also just informed me that he would be happy to meet with Angela Constance to discuss this report at an appropriate point in the near future.
Thank you very much, and that concludes topical questions.